Hello, friends. You are now listening to the Awe Inspiration Podcast with your host, Jagriti Luitel. Here, we examine high achievers' perspectives through a holistic lens, since we want to learn not what to think, but how to think. With a focus on space exploration, well-being, technology, and philosophy, I hope that these conversations will lead us on a journey to awe inspiration. So, come with me. All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Awe Inspiration Podcast. I am your host, Jagriti Luitel, and I'm super excited to be back with another very exciting guest. Our guest today is Maikala Harris. She is a passionate educator, advocate, and innovative strategist. Like many biracial individuals, she has a traditional name, Aisha Said, which she also goes by. Working as an inclusive specialized teacher in Canada, Mexico, Kenya, Macau, and Dubai, she has experienced the power of education and the importance of traditional ways of knowing firsthand. Throughout her career as an educator, Maikala honed her skills, training teachers and school staff about inclusive practices, including tangible tools to create differentiation for all learners to find success. When shifting into human resources, she took this passion into the business world, crafting unique ways to seamlessly weave inclusion into the rigid company structures. As the director of programs at Space4Humanity, Maikala is heading up the Inclusion Council, Citizen Astronaut Program, which is how we got connected, and overseeing internal human resources. Her goal is to ensure that the human experience associated with Space4Humanity is that of community, empowerment, and deep connection to the Space4Humanity mission. I back this claim. She is currently in Egypt, and in her downtime, she enjoys leatherworking, exploring new cafes, and restoring furniture. Welcome, Maikala.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, I'm just as excited to have this conversation with you. So to start off, I just want to take a few steps back in the memory lane and just start with the question about where you are today and what got you here. So you have a very unique position in terms of your role today um, as the director of human experiences at Space4Humanity. And that seems like a very complicated job. So my question to you is, what life experiences do you believe have made you capable enough for this position?
Okay. Yes, that's such a good question. There's no degree, program, or path that could prepare you for this kind of a job. Um, so I think that it's the little jobs that I had along the way, the smaller experiences during getting my degrees that actually lend themselves a lot more. So every time that there would be a job opening that I would hear about, no matter what field it was in, I would always apply. And I feel like it's slowly made itself back. For example, I worked as a junior legal assistant. Well, we have to look at contracts with the different flight providers, as well as all kinds of different, legal jargon that comes up. I worked for a while in the cosmetic beauty industry, and they think that's like so far away. But it also, that creativity, that love for just exploration into learning different things. Also, the skin is very complicated once you get down past the epidermis, right? So, that kind of thing. Even
Yeah.
learning how to talk with people, customer service. I worked for a while building websites, and now I help to create custom tech that we use just for the program. So all kinds of different jobs have lent themselves to magically help in this unique role.
And I can see how all those experiences would not just let you have a interesting career, but also an interesting life. I feel like you must have stories about all of those categories that would be very interesting. Um, so, as we said before, you have also worked as a teacher. So, I am very interested in the role that teachers play in shaping, like, the culture, the society, and humanity in general. So, my question to you is, what teacher has made the biggest impact or difference in your trajectory? And how did they make this happen? And why is teaching so critical in shaping the world of today and also the future?
Hmm. That, it's hard because I don't remember her name, but I can remember sitting in the desk beside her and I had just failed another test. And
Mm.
I was new to the school. We had just moved from northern Canada to southern Canada, and we moved for my education because,
Mm.
the residential school era, you know, it just really permeated and still permeates everything. And so education, the
Mm.
teachers that went up north, there was a lot of gaps. And so we moved to the
Mm.
South for my education, but I didn't see the importance of it. I didn't have buy in
Mm.
at all because no one else in my
Mm.
class up north had buy in at all. And the parents certainly didn't have buy in
Mm.
because of what had happened, right? And so I remember
Mm.
distinctly sitting by this teacher, and she was like, if you keep failing, how will you reach your dreams? And I was like, what are you
Mm.
talking about? And she was like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that was the first time a teacher had ever asked me that. And I was in seventh grade. And I was like, I don't know. And
Mm.
I really didn't know. It wasn't an option that I could dream of anything and it could just become attainable or I could take a degree path to it. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, wow, this lady is so naive. She thinks that I can just choose something and do it. But it was that kind of question where we had
Mm.
this kind of cultural clash that it started making me think, like, wow, okay, well,
Mm.
maybe there's something to this system, and maybe there's an exit that will help in my life, and maybe I
Mm.
do need to try and pass
Mm.
this tiny test.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like sometimes they say, instead of like giving advice to someone, believing in them changes them more than just like being
Hmm.
like, do this, or giving them the right advice. Someone believing in us is worth like a lot more. So
Hmm.
it kind of like reminds me of that. And um yeah, and also just the future of teaching in general. And how what I just got from your answer is that, like, caring matters.
Hmm.
Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Not just doing your job for the sake of doing it, but the care seems to be very
Yes,
important.
I agree.
um and so the next thing I want to learn about you is a bit more about your career. And um I think one of the reasons that made me want to have you on my podcast is because of not enough voices in this like area sometimes, of people that understand the struggles of people that don't historically look like they belong.
Mhm.
um and so one of my questions to you is about the Space for Humanity itself. Like, um so one question I have for you is, when applicants apply to this, should they be thinking of, I just want to optimize my whole life around this application, and I'm just gonna, change my life choices so that that increases the probability of me getting selected? Or should they be seeking natural alignment and just like
Yeah.
keep doing their thing, and if it happens to send in an application? So what is your perspective on this?
Wow. Well, I have a lot of people who try and kind of gamify the application and they want
Yeah.
the right answer. And you
Hmm.
know, this is not like applying to university. This is not applying to your post-secondary, your graduate, all this kind of stuff. And so there actually is no right answer, which really makes people upset. Because it truly is, we're looking at leadership that looks like so many different things: community development and impact.
Yeah.
So all of those are very much subjective and they can look totally different. And I would say that if you wanted to choose something that was super impactful, but it didn't weigh truthful to what's important to you, that we would see through that, right? We want someone who has a mission, wants to take this mission, and wants to change the world. And there's this spark and this glow that comes from someone when they talk about it. And so if you're just trying to game it and you're like, I think this is really important, and I'm going to ask 5 of my colleagues to look at my application, and everyone's like, yeah, it's a good application. Well, no, if it doesn't have that fire in the belly, then it's not aligned, and you would probably score low on the lower end, once we start having those conversations.
And even if you do get selected for the answer where you're not yourself,
Yeah,
you wouldn't probably enjoy the job either. Like, even if you
exactly.
do get it, it wouldn't be like something you would enjoy because you would have to have been yourself throughout the process. So another question I have for you is, if you could alter one specific limiting belief in
Mhm.
applicants, what would it be and what would you say to them?
Every citizen astronaut has been like, are you sure it's me? Like, did you mess up? Are you sure? And I'm like, no. Like, I'm not mixing up applications. You are chosen to be the next citizen astronaut. Um, and so everyone, no matter who they are, thinks to themselves, like, wow, really? Are you sure I made it? So a lot of people enter with those limiting beliefs, and that's okay, because this is also the biggest dream come true. And so it's okay to be like,
Yeah.
are you sure? But, I think that everyone is deserving to go to space and be involved in this program. So I try and really tell people, like, is it the right
Mhm.
time? Is there alignment? Does it make sense for both people, both parties, Space for Humanity and you?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because it's also okay if this is the
Mhm.
right program for you, but it's the wrong time, right? Because we're asking a lot of the person. We're asking
Yeah.
you to go up to
Mhm.
space. We're asking you for a year of your life to be doing this leadership, community development, and impact program. That's a lot. And so we want it to
Mhm.
really feel
Yeah.
like it's easy, like this is the time to do it. Um, but yeah, everyone is deserving to
Yeah.
be going. So if I tap you on the shoulder, I'm like, let's have a conversation. It's intentional and you deserve to be there. And I want to
Mhm.
explore things.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I just so out of all of that, like, one of my questions to you is a bit more complicated, and you can take your time
Yes.
with this one. Um,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I felt in the process was that, and it's like my own personal journey. It wasn't Space for Humanity. Again, it's about two people coming together, or two parties coming together.
Mhm.
And one of the things that came up for me was like the theme of trauma. And I know you're very trauma informed in your ways of dealing with this process. And so trauma shapes how people are and who people are today. And when we talk about it and live with it and heal from it, it is like an understandable hurdle for many people to like be vulnerable about that. So what would you recommend someone who wants to show who they are in their application, but is like really struggling with like that level of vulnerability? And I will have a follow-up question to that, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Yes, I get it. I have had a lot of complex trauma in my life, and I've
Mm-hmm.
struggled being able to share my lessons from it and also share about
Yeah.
it. I think that that is because we are taught that it has to be the hero's journey, and we like survive the trauma and we learn something from the trauma and we heal from the trauma before people let us be credible again.
Mhm.
But some of my traumas, for
Be fixed.
example, yeah, once you're fixed, then it's like you're credible. If not, you're kind of like a liability. Um, but,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think that's also because a lot of people at the top haven't dealt with complex trauma. And so they're nervous about it.
Mhm.
They're nervous that
Mhm.
it just doesn't ring true to them. It's messy. And it's like, well, yeah,
Mhm.
it's messy. I mean, one of the things, I lost both my parents in my early 20s. And, so technically I'm an orphan. And
Yeah.
so it's one of those things where when you tell someone, they're like, "Ew." You're like, yes, but this is also the case for thousands, millions of people around the world. Um, it's something that I'll always be
Mhm.
working with, always be involved. It'll be part of my life forever. There's no healing from it 100%. It's a complex trauma.
Mhm.
Um, so part of my understanding and evolution within myself is, I think, really important to be a leader in this program, because when
Mhm.
I hear other people's stories, it doesn't scare
Mhm.
me. I'm not like, have you healed from it? Are you ready? It's
Mm.
like, no, this is your story. And we don't, a lot of the things as well, when we look
Yeah.
at different diasporas and communities, we certainly did not ask for the trauma, the intergenerational trauma, the political
Mhm.
trauma, the war, you name it. We did not sign up for it. And so when you have people in power who don't get it because they're not from these communities and these experiences, that's where there's a real disconnection, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems like a very important aspect of all of this. And um so in terms of, so if somebody doesn't make it, right? So this is one
Mhm,
of the questions that it's like a burning question I have. So if someone
mhm,
doesn't get accepted, one of the dilemmas then becomes, you did become vulnerable, and it's not that you're entitled to be rewarded for being vulnerable, but you
mhm.
did a difficult thing, and
Yeah.
you shouldn't take it as like, oh, I failed, but you learned something. But still, like, if it doesn't go through, I'm my perspective on that would be like, what if they become afraid to show
Mhm,
who they are, like, in the
mhm,
future? So what if people take the wrong conclusion? So how do we prevent people from making sure they're taking the right conclusions from the right results in the
mhm.
process?
I wish that we had more bandwidth to talk with people, to talk with applicants, because I think a lot of people do
Mm,
make jumps in assumption about why they weren't chosen.
yeah.
But I can't stress enough,
Mm-hmm.
it really goes back to that leadership, community development, and impact. Now, I will say
Mm,
that if the reverse was there and someone was like, I didn't have enough trauma, that's why they didn't choose me, I worry about that as well, right? Because they're like,
mm-hmm.
well, if I grew up
Mm-hmm.
here and I had this experience. So what I really want to showcase to people is that we just use the LCDI, Leadership, Community Development, and Impact, as the beacon. And it is so easy. But what
Mm-hmm.
happens is people with complex trauma, that's kind of their why for doing leadership. That's the why in community development. It's because they have to do it, right? There's usually something lacking there. There's usually barriers to entry there. Um, and the
Mm-hmm.
impact, it just a roll of the dice to have that understanding because of trauma, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that someone with trauma will score higher. They just might have been led to needing to do this work in their community um,
Mm-hmm.
sooner or on a different scale than somebody else.
No, that's a very important point. So so it is so what I'm hearing is that it is possible that trauma, instead of working against you, which happens usually in the rest of our lives, might even propel our purpose. Like it
Yeah.
might even like help us like discover what we really want to do and what we're willing to tolerate. And obviously there's a thin
Mm,
line of how much you want to expose yourself, but the
exactly.
fact that trauma could propel purpose is very interesting.
Hmm. And just to retouch on what you were talking about, I think that that's a really interesting point, that people don't know who's behind the program and they don't know how we've set it up, which is why I'm on your podcast and I'm doing more things to talk
Yeah.
openly with people, because there's no part of someone being vulnerable that we're like, too vulnerable, get him out of here. So, you know, people really
Yeah.
do share so much of themselves in these applications. I kind of say it's chicken soup for the soul. People, they just are, it's really cathartic to be like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why it's important,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so we're not looking
Mm-hmm.
at that aspect in terms of evaluation. It just comes
Mm-hmm.
back to that LCDI. And while we're on trauma, I did want to mention that I built into the program a few different things because I noticed that trauma is a theme. So if
Mm-hmm.
you come to me in your application and you're very vulnerable and you're like, this is why I do this. For example, sexual assault. This was my experience, and this is why I
Mm-hmm.
coach women. This is why I put protection in place for women. This is why I have, you name it. But if you're chosen, and if that why you're not wanting to share it with the public, it stays with you and me. And that's totally fine. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll highlight the LCDI you do over here. And we won't talk about the why that got you there.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's certain traumas in my life that I'm not open about. And that's okay. And there's
Yeah.
other things that I'm like, yeah, this was part of my
Mm-hmm.
path, or this is a community I'm in, or, something that's a lot more public. So that's one thing that I built in. Another thing that I built in is that we have a lot of inclusion within the program. And so there are times you can put your hand up and be like, this is overwhelming for me. I need supports.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have
Mm-hmm.
people decide on a practitioner, a therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, psychologist of their choice. They talk to this person
Mm-hmm.
before the flight and they talk to this person after the flight. Because going back to the example of sexual
Mm-hmm.
assault, well, if that's your why and you're having to rethink about that,
Mm-hmm.
that's re
Mm-hmm.
traumatizing. That's a trauma trigger. So
Yeah.
we put in
Mm-hmm.
place talking to a professional in case that, comes up and someone is needing that support along the way.
That completely makes sense. So even after they're selected, like they don't have to be like, okay, yeah, this is how I got in. I have to keep resharing this story to like a whole world
Hmm.
out there. They can, it's again like I think the word is like agency. Like they have
Yes.
agency over what
Hmm.
they want it to look like, and obviously everything else. So so it seems like trauma care is kind of integrated in the program, which is great to hear.
There's a
Because
lot
that
of
would be
care.
a lot if it wasn't the case.
Hmm.
The teacher
Yeah.
thing.
The teacher,
The
the,
background
the
has a teacher is
kindergarten,
coming.
the kindergarten teacher. I'm here to put in supports. I'm here to make sure this is like a
Yeah.
really positive experience.
You're probably adhering to people's inner child, so the whole kindergarten analogy makes a lot of sense.
Totally.
Okay, so taking a bit of another route, um, I just wanted to ask you what has been. Okay, I know you recently told me you had a child recently, so if you're open to talking about it, this podcast is also like trying to be like multidimensional and not just career achievements focused. So, a question I have for you is, what has being a recent mother taught you about life?
Oh, wow. You know, I just am recently little his name is Zane. We call him Zaza.
Aw.
Zaza's just 2 months
Mhm.
old. And so it's so recent.
Oh my God.
Um, it's
Mhm.
been the hardest thing I have ever done. And I feel like I've done a lot of hard things. But at the same time, the juxtaposition is also the easiest thing I've ever done in certain respects. Like you see your body do things
Mm.
that it just does. It just builds a baby inside of you. And you're like, whoa, that's so easy. It when it does this at this month and that at that month. And you're like, this is so beautiful and magical. But then on the flip side, it's really hard. You've got a lot of different things
Mm.
going on. For me, I had a really, really tricky pregnancy. And so I
Mm.
feel like I was just constantly like operating at 20% for months, for just
Wow.
months.
Wow.
You
Mhm.
know, so it's been really beautiful. I didn't know if I would ever become a mother, to be honest with you. It was something that I
Mm.
thought to myself, this would be awesome. If it happens, if it's meant to be,
Mhm.
let's go for it. And if not, if it's not, then it's not, and that's okay. And so when it did,
Mhm.
and we ended up having our first child, it's just mind blowing. And I'm just so grateful that we've been able to have this little baby Zaza.
Oh my God. Congratulations. Sounds
Thank you.
lovely. So thank you for that insight. That was, I think, a really important conversation because so many of my friends that are also trying to do all of these things in life, they're like, how do people have kids? There's no way, like, you do more on top of this. Like, it's just incomprehensible to us. So, one of the things I ask all of my guests is about their how do they balance their life and a very demanding career. So, I asked that to the chief engineer of NASA as well, and he was saying that the future workspaces they're trying to make it better for like mothers. So that makes me a bit more hopeful. Um, but for you specifically, because you've gone through that process.
Mhm. Well, I'll tell you, if I wasn't living in Egypt, I wouldn't be on this call right now. That's for sure.
Oh
Because
no.
yeah, living in Egypt is amazing. I have my sister-in-law watching my baby at
Mm,
home, right? I'm able to have like a
mm-hmm,
community around me. It's really traditional in terms of, you know, the supports that are still in place. Whereas in the West, a lot of the
mm-hmm.
supports you have to pay for. The nanny, the cleaner, the cook, the this,
Yeah.
the that. Whereas I have family coming over that are cooking for me and cleaning and supporting and watching the baby and making sure I sleep. And now I'm at a co-working space to be able to work. And I know that my baby's
Mm,
with family. So I'm not stressed out, you know, thinking about daycare. If I could even find daycare, if I
mm,
could even afford daycare in the West. Like, whoa. So I don't know that I would
mm.
have even
Yeah.
been able to do this if I wasn't living in Egypt.
Wow. So if you had to give advice to
Mhm.
young girls now,
Yeah.
and again, it doesn't have to be like a um, one size fits all, but I want to get as many perspectives as possible. What insights or advice would you give them
Mhm.
about this? Like either like balancing like work and personal life.
Yeah. See what you can dig into from the traditional, because we set it up so that a village
Mm,
raised a child all over the world.
mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, you can be the most amazing mother or father or caregiver. If you're one, it's not enough. So
Mm,
just try and cultivate community however you can. In
mm-hmm.
the West, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even
Mm-hmm.
having a few families together, pool resources, one person cooks for the week, like anything you can to just not have the load weigh so heavily on that nuclear family. That's my suggestion,
Mm,
if you can. And you know what?
mm,
If you're fortunate to have traditional communities back home, if you've moved or relocated, maybe coming back for the first 6
mhm,
months, if you can, during that maternity leave, could
mm.
be really, really helpful for you.
I'm gonna start thinking about going back to Nepal. Too early.
If you have kids, maybe, yeah.
No, it's like I think I'm a very much of a forward planner, so I like knowing what happens a decade from now. So I know how to like forward plan. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but a few of my friends they also want to be like astronauts and stuff, and they're like, "How am I gonna go to space and have kids at the same time?" And it's just such a like cannot comprehend the two realities at the same time kind of topic for us. So even
Mm-hmm.
when I was interning at the Canadian Space Agency, I asked the person that selects astronauts
Mm-hmm.
at that agency what he recommends and stuff. So one of our astronauts recently had a child as well, two of them, but she hasn't gone to space yet. But she's like a professional astronaut. That's
Mm-hmm.
her job. Um, but he was talking about how it is definitely more complicated for women
Mm-hmm.
if that is like for sure what they want, like both things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
But you can do
that
it.
that's
You can do it, and that's it.
yes,
The thing is,
it's possible.
men don't ask. Men don't ask. They're just like, my wife and kids are at home, So maybe it means that your partner is taking more of the load at home, right? There's so many different
Hmm.
ways that you can construct the family. What I think he might be talking to is that like nuclear, like you have to do all of the domestic and the work
Yeah.
and all of the
Mm,
unspoken things. That, I mean, that's hard if you're working in any job, right? So
hmm.
I think just being creative in sharing that load however you can.
Yeah, and one of the things I also felt was more open discussions need to happen because I was just
Mhm.
like, why are people not talking about this? So when I was designing this podcast, I was like, I'm gonna ask all the questions that I actually want to know about, and not just the ones that,
I
hey,
love that. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. So next up, I want to learn a bit more about your perspective on the greater society and the world. So we're just moving up levels.
beautiful.
um, so if there is a and we did talk about the disparity in Western world and probably the rest of the world. And I grew up in Nepal, and I know how different it is because I lived there for 15 years now. I'm in Canada. And I
Mhm.
think the biggest difference I find is that the children here have a completely new level of a sense of possibilities for their life. They're like, oh, I
Mhm.
can do this, I can do that. And I'm like, how do you know that you can do those things? So, one of my questions for you is if there's a student listening from Nepal or any country like that, or Egypt, and they do not see like space exploration or going to space as a possibility for themselves, what message would you give that child, considering you work at the bleeding edge
Mhm.
at this point where it's almost the access point? So, what can you tell them from your position?
What we talked about before is just that jarring reality that there are so few doors that lead to this dream of
Mm-hmm,
going to space. And certain diasporas and
mm-hmm,
communities, the door is not even there, right? They're still looking for the right building to find the door. So I
mm-hmm,
I don't like to
mm-hmm,
sugarcoat it like just follow your dreams because that's not helpful advice. I mean, to believe in yourself is
mm-hmm,
going to be central, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. It's going to be so hard. So using that analogy of
mm-hmm,
the door, if the door's not there, you got to build it yourself. You got to make the opportunities for yourself. And probably
mm-hmm.
you'll bring along your community, right? That's why people are scoring so high from different communities that haven't seen
Mhm.
spaceflight before, um, in terms of that leadership, community development, and impact. So I think looking at if the opportunities aren't there and looking around to see if there are, walk through every single door that's available. Try everything you can,
Mhm.
right? Like I talked about all of the
Mhm.
different jobs that I had that applied themselves that I never knew. Um, but it's
Mhm.
so hard. It's so hard when you're also in a different, there's, you know, different places in the world that there's just so much more opportunity in terms of those internships, in terms of getting that ground level job. So,
Mhm.
really, it's okay if you start over here, but you want to end in the other, other side of maybe industry. That's okay. Just taking
Mhm.
whatever door is open,
Mhm.
walking through it, seeing if it's for you, and it's okay if you leave. It's okay if you try it out and you're like,
Mhm.
this is not the right path. Um, and then also creating opportunities for yourself, building those doors. And I think also
Mhm.
another thing that I see over and over again is that people with limited opportunities get really burnt out by joining every
Mhm.
club and doing every volunteer
Yeah.
opportunity. And because I didn't just give the
Mhm.
advice of build your own door and do your own thing, but I'm also giving the
Yeah.
advice of take some time and pause. Don't burn out. It's
Mhm.
not going to help anybody
Mhm.
if you're burnt out. And I'll tell you what, probably if you're working with that mentality of like, I'm going to take every opportunity, you're going to be the best employee that they've ever seen because you're going above and beyond,
Mhm.
right? And you're like,
Mhm.
you're going for it. But people will just keep using that to their advantage. And so you have to have the autonomy to be like,
Mhm.
I'm close to burnout. I need to pause.
I relate to that. I feel like I have definitely overcompensated where I'm like, okay, now I have an opportunity, let me like go all in. And
Mm-hmm.
the all in combined with the, I think the things about trauma and all of these other complicated realities make it much more much more difficult to navigate. But if somebody wants to pioneer in something, because if they do
Mm-hmm.
make it, they will be the first most likely. So being a
Mm-hmm.
pioneer is like no one said that was going to be easy. So what I'm hearing is that if there's no opportunities, there are possibilities. So
Mm-hmm.
people have to like kind of cultivate those possibilities, but at the same time be aware of like creating boundaries for themselves and like keeping their like
Yeah,
self-care in mind simultaneously.
exactly. And also it's not a race. You think about that when you're young, you just want to like
Yeah.
zoom through and there's this like romanticization of being the youngest to do XYZ. That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. I'm a
Yeah.
little bit old now and I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, I learned more from those times of pausing as well. The travel, the taking. I used to
Mm,
take I took it took me
yeah.
9 years, okay? It took me 9 years to do my first degree.
Mm,
9 years. And that's okay because I was working in between. I lived in Mexico in between. I did all kinds of different things. And, but a lot of people are
mm-hmm.
like, I graduated in 3 years. And you're like, it's not a race though. It's okay.
Yeah. This reminds me of two things. Like I think today's culture's obsession with like youth success, like this person
Mhm.
achieved this at a very young age and like sensationalizing like all those stories are so um prevalent that I think
Mhm.
it puts like invisible pressure on people that oh I have to achieve this by this point.
Oh,
Obviously
yeah.
some of those structures can be helpful, but I just feel like people love like the young success stories so much. But I just love hearing about like a mother that like started her business at 45. Like
Yeah.
I love stories that of like regeneration. Um,
Exactly. Like
so
there's
so those are,
ageism. There's
yeah,
ageism sprinkled all over
yes,
everywhere in our society. So it's
yeah,
okay. It's okay to wait. I mean,
yeah, and
if it
also
happens
like
now, beautiful. But if it happens in 5 years, you're not going to be like, I wish it happened earlier, because it's going to happen when it's going to happen. I think that's also important.
yeah, I think when you talk about being ready, I like really get it now because like you don't want to get something you're not ready for. Like I think
Mhm.
that concept is hard to grasp when you want something so bad. But this concept of second mountain, when you want something so bad, after you get it, it's actually more depressing sometimes instead of
Mhm.
like, yes, it doesn't feel how we think it's gonna feel. It feels like,
Mhm.
okay, now what's my purpose? I've been working towards this. So a part of me is like, let me drag out the climb because when I do get there, I'm gonna look for a second mountain immediately after that.
Mhm.
Um, so
I I like that.
yeah, and also I think when you were talking about that it's not a race, I like there's this concept of like finite and infinite games. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's this like finite games are like they've set rules, they've set
Mhm.
timeline, and you have set rules and you just follow it and then you have an endpoint. And then there are infinite games that are like you just play it for the sake of it's not a
Ah.
means to an end.
Mhm.
So I feel like a degree people see as a finite game, but a
Yeah.
career is an infinite game. So it's like an
Yeah.
endurance sport, not a sprint kind of thing. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and I think I was in that category of like when I was like 19 and stuff, I was like, okay, let's zoom through just like you said.
Mhm.
But now, like health, career, all of these things,
Yeah.
I view more as like infinite games. And Simon Sinek, I
Exactly.
think, has a new book on infinite games. That's a key mindset difference that has been helpful for me.
Also, if you're going too fast, you don't have time for error or the
Mm-hmm.
reflection that's needed. So if you go so fast, A to B, well, what if you actually wanted to go somewhere else? What if you just wanted to go A to D?
Yeah.
But now you're like A, B, C, D. Like, what if what if you just don't have built in the time to reflect to make sure you're going in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
And also along that vein,
Yeah.
failure is the most beautiful thing you can ever do in as long as we're doing it with checks and balances, we're learning from it. um but
Yeah.
being okay, being humble, being able to be surrounded by people who
Mm-hmm.
allow you to fail. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
on version 2 of the citizen astronaut program, right? If I didn't have the mentality of like, let's always make this better, like let's always try and improve,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm going to do it this time, it's going to be the best I can do, but then I'll reflect and I know I can do it better. Like I think that's really important to bring to the
Mm-hmm.
table.
So a constant sense of like iteration instead of
Hmm.
like because if you just zoom through, I don't think like you said, there's no time to ask if I really want this anymore. Because a lot of high achieving people I meet, they're
Hmm.
running, but they don't remember why they're running so fast. But they
Yeah.
just know that they have to run really fast, so they're just running.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's something I find. But intentionally high achieving people are rare.
Yes. They're needed. They're
Because
needed to be together.
because the running can be they could be running towards something, but they could also be running away from something. But they're just
Hmm.
running. That's
Hmm.
all we can see. Um,
Exactly.
this is not in the questions I prepared. Oh, this next question is not in the questions I prepared, but I'm just curious now. How do you learn a new skill how do you have such a growth mindset? Like you said, you've worked so many different kind of jobs,
Mhm.
but how do you like convince yourself you can figure out any like domain of anything? What helps you learn new skills easily?
Yeah. Well, I think just knowing that I am going to fail. I just know I am. So, for example, when
Mm,
I turned 19 living in Mexico. Okay. So just to give you the
mm,
Coles notes, I was working at Shoppers Drug Mart, taking university. I was taking a
mm-hmm,
degree in international development studies. And there was this professor that said,
mm-hmm,
like, if you don't travel and if you don't do an internship, you won't get a job. And I was like, oh, I need the job. I couldn't afford to do the internship because it costs like so much to go and travel and learn. And so I thought, you know what? I heard of
mm-hmm.
this lady while I was at Shoppers Drug Mart. She worked in the front cash. I worked in cosmetics. She told me she was moving to Mexico. And I was like, let me see. Why don't I go for a year? I'll pause university. Let me just try. And that's a line on my resume. Worked in Mexico. It's the same as an internship. I'll do it myself. So I packed up
Uh-huh.
all my things. I put my university on pause and I went down to
Mm-hmm.
very rural Mexico. And I went before we had smartphones. I
Uh-huh.
am a little bit old. No Google Translate. Um, there were like internet cafes where you're like, "Hi, mom, I'm still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about me. I'll try and find out how I can call with this phone card." Um, but what I realized down there when I was learning Spanish, everyone's so impressed that I learned Spanish fluently in like 3 to 4 months. And nobody
Wow.
listens to the part where I was constantly being like, what's going on? What are you saying? And trying to figure out how to do this language,
Mm,
asking kids, being like, do you know what they said? Can you draw what they said? I have no idea.
mhm.
I was living somewhere so rural, I couldn't even buy a dictionary, an English Spanish dictionary.
Wow.
So it's like there was so much failure that led to so much success that whenever I walk into something new,
Mm,
I know I'm going to fail. And so now I
mm,
just look for, it's not about quickly picking myself up, but just trying to see where it will be so that I can kind of support
mm,
myself through the failure. So maybe now I talk to a professional who knows a lot about that. Or maybe I will, you know,
mm,
put some extra time into this one pocket of whatever I'm doing that I'm pretty sure I'm going to fail at. Or another thing
mhm,
is, just looking like you don't know what you're doing is okay
mm.
as well. We're so afraid of that. And this, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, but the younger
yeah,
generation, they are so afraid.
yeah. Oh my God. That's such an important insight. I think your ability to like strategize around failure instead of it seems like you don't see failure as like a surprise. You're like already building it into your system and you already expect it.
Hmm.
And that's like a really interesting unlock. And also, I think about your point about I think a lot of people are playing like status games. So what
Mm,
will sound the best instead of
mm,
where will I learn the most? It's like
yeah.
I have a
Hmm.
blog on this topic as well where I'm like, don't make life decisions for 15 seconds of fame. Make it for 86,000 seconds of your day.
Oh, sorry, I'm just coughing away. I'm still so sick. 1 second.
Yeah,
Okay. Yes,
you can take
exactly.
a minute if you have to take water or something. It-
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Both me and the baby are
that's a
sick.
good thing about oh, that's a good thing about podcasts. It's not like an interview only. Like it's a chill conversation. So this
Oh,
happens in real life. So I'm trying to replicate a conversation in real life.
totally. Totally. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm
Yeah.
back living.
Yeah, I have like a throat issue as well, so completely understand. Um, yeah, so I was just saying the status games can be very dangerous, especially, and I see it all the time with my peers. Everyone's like, "What? How can I get the most prestigious internship?" And I've been in that boat. There's definitely a balance because you can't just. I feel like having some prestigious helps you. Like, it's not nothing. It's not everything. Basically, is
Mm.
how I look at it. But just making decisions for status. So it seems like you're not afraid to be seen doing small things. Therefore, you become more big. Like, it's like a paradox in there.
Well, I never set out to say I'm going to teach in Mexico, Kenya, Macau, and Dubai, and that's going to look really good.
Mm,
I just did those things, and
yeah.
it just added up, and it just like made itself into a career that was authentically stuff that I really liked to do and had passion
Mm,
about. I worry about people who just
mm-hmm,
build their careers around these prestigious places because it's almost like they're trying to
mm-hmm,
replicate privilege. They're getting prestige and privilege
mm-hmm.
kind of twisted because if you have privilege, you get into the
Yeah.
prestigious places without a blink of an eye. It's just you're there.
Mm,
And so people say, like, that's what will
yeah.
get me to success. Well, no, because those folks who the pipeline from privilege to prestige to my uncle has a company and I'm going to get an internship and, oh, he'll hold the job for
Mm,
me. That's a pipeline that not a lot of us are in. And so I think that there's this
mm,
need to dismantle and really look at
mm-hmm.
stripping away the degrees and the internships and the job titles and